In the shadowed dawn of ancient Greece, where gods walked among mortals and fate twisted like a serpent, a child was born unlike any other. His name was Heracles, known later as Hercules by the Romans. He was the product of divine deceit. Zeus, ruler of Olympus, seduced the mortal queen Alcmene while disguised as her husband. From this union came a boy destined for greatness and agony alike. But from the very first moment of his life, the heavens above and the gods below took notice, and not all welcomed his birth. Hera, the powerful and vengeful wife of Zeus, burned with jealousy. She loathed the child of her husband's betrayal. Before Heracles even took his first breath, she plotted against him. She delayed his birth and accelerated that of his cousin Eurystheus, ensuring he would rule instead. When Heracles was only days old, Hera sent 2 venomous serpents into his cradle to kill him. But the infant didn't cry. He grabbed the snakes with his tiny hands and crushed them, smiling as if playing with toys. The palace stood in awe. His strength was already legendary. As Heracles grew, so did his might. By adolescence, he towered over his peers, broad-shouldered and full of raw power. He trained in music, archery, wrestling, and warcraft. But he wasn't a gentle soul. His temper was as fierce as his strength. Once, in a fit of anger, he killed his music teacher with a single blow. Still, he protected his homeland from beasts and brigands, earning the admiration of kings. To many, he seemed like a gift from Olympus, but Hera never forgot him. Her wrath still stirred, hidden like embers under ash. In time, Heracles married Megara, daughter of the Theban king. They had sons, and for a short while, he lived as a peaceful man. But peace never lasts for a hero cursed by gods. One day, Hera sent madness upon him, a divine storm inside his mind. Heracles lost all reason. In a frenzied hallucination, he slaughtered his children and wife with his own hands, thinking they were enemies. When the fog lifted, he was drenched in blood and horror. That day shattered him. Not even his strength could save him from guilt. Heracles wandered, broken and haunted by the screams of his lost family. Desperate for forgiveness, he journeyed to Delphi and knelt before the oracle. The Pythia, speaking for Apollo, gave a cruel but clear answer. Serve your enemy. Serve Eurystheus, the very cousin born by Hera's trickery. Complete 12 impossibly dangerous labors, and only then could his soul be cleansed. Heracles agreed without protest. Redemption was the only thing left to fight for. And so began the 12 labor tasks, crafted not for glory, but for suffering, death, and perhaps salvation. Eurystheus, the cowardly king of Tyrants and pawn of Hera, was terrified by the idea of Heracles serving him, but he obeyed the oracle's will. For Heracles' first labor, he ordered the hero to slay the Nemean Leona, monstrous beast that ravaged the countryside, killing livestock and warriors alike. But this was no ordinary lion. Its golden fur was impervious to weapons. No blade could cut it. No arrow could pierce it. The creature lived in a dark cave near the town of Nemea, where bones of past victims piled high. Heracles set out alone, armed with his bow, a sword, and a massive wooden club carved from an olive tree. As he entered the rocky, forested hills of Nemea, a heavy silence hung in the air. No birds sang, no animals stirred. All feared the lion. Locals warned him to turn back, but Heracles pressed on. He found the caveat's twin entrances shadowed by twisted roots and stained with blood. He chose to block one exit with boulders, forcing the lion into a single path. He would meet it face to face. The battle began with bow and arrows, but the shafts bounced off the lion's hide like pebbles. Sword strikes did nothing. The lion roared, a thunderous, bone-chilling sound that shook the cave walls. With no other option, Heracles hurled aside his weapons and charged. They grappled like gods in mortal form, fang against fist, claw against muscle. The lion bit deep into Heracles' shoulder, but he held firm. With veins bulging and breath ragged, he wrapped his arms around the beast's neck and squeezed. Minutes passed. At last, the lion went limp. Heracles emerged from the cave, bloodied and triumphant, dragging the massive carcass behind him. But his trial wasn't over. No tool could skin the lion, not even his sword. So he used one of the lion's own claws to cut through the enchanted fur. From its hide, he fashioned a cloak of invincibility. The lion's gaping maw became a hood over his head. It would become his trademark, an armor no man or monster could breach. Thus, clothed in conquest, Heracles began his long journey back to the court of Eurystheus. When Eurystheus saw Heracles returning alive, cloaked in the lion's terrifying skin, his courage failed entirely. Pale with fear, the king leapt into a giant bronze jar and refused to come out. From that day forward, he would not speak to Heracles directly but used messengers instead. Still, he grudgingly accepted the lion's death as a success. One labor was complete, but Hera smiled from above. She knew the path ahead would grow darker, harder, and more monstrous. The second labor was already being planned, and it would strike from the swamps of Lerna. Heracles barely had time to rest before Eurystheus announced the second labor: to slay the Lernaean Hydra. The beast dwelled in the fetid swamps of Lerna, where the land itself rotted and stank. Born of Typhon and Echidna, it was a creature of chaos, gigantic, serpent-bodied, with 9 venomous heads. Worse still, when one head was severed, 2 more would grow in its place. Its breath was poison, its blood a deadly acid. Anyone who ventured near its lair vanished, their bones swallowed by the bog. This time, Heracles did not go alone. He brought his young nephew Iolaus, clever and loyal, to drive the chariot and assist if needed. As they approached the swamp, a thick, unnatural fog rolled over the reeds. Trees stood gnarled and blackened, lifeless birds hanging from branches. The water bubbled without heat. From a cave in the marsh, the Hydra emerged, its heads weaving and hissing in unison, each with fangs dripping venom. The air stung Heracles' lung. The very swamp rejected life, and Heracles knew that steel alone would not be enough. The fight erupted like a storm. Heracles swung his sword with fury, decapitating head after head, but each one sprouted 2 more in seconds. The Hydra coiled and struck, its mouth snapping at his legs, its tail whipping like a battering ram. Poison splattered the earth. Heracles was soon surrounded by snarling, regenerating heads. The more he fought, the worse it became. But Iolaus, watching from a distance, had an idea aflame. Grabbing a burning torch, he rushed to his uncle's side, ready to change the course of the battle. With each swing of Heracles' sword, Iolaus followed, searing the stumps of the severed necks with blazing fire. The moment the heads were cut, he burned the wounds, preventing them from regrowing. Slowly, the tide turned. The Hydra screeched and thrashed, its body writhing like a storm-driven sea serpent. Heracles crushed its final immortal head beneath his foot and buried it under a massive rock, deep in the mud. The beast lay still. The swamp fell silent for the first time in generations. The Hydra was dead, but its legacy was not. From the Hydra's corpse, Heracles collected its black, acidic blood, dipping his arrows into it. From that day forward, every wound his arrows made would be laced with death. Yet Eurystheus, influenced by Hera, refused to count the labor as valid. He had help, the king declared bitterly, discrediting Iolaus's role. But Heracles didn't care for the king's approval. He knew what he had faced and what he had survived. With fire and strength, he had overcome regeneration itself. Now, he turned toward his third task, one that required speed, not strength. The third labor seemed gentle, at least on the surface. Heracles was ordered to capture the Cyrenian hind, a sacred deer of extraordinary speed and beauty. It had golden antlers, bronze hooves, and was beloved by the goddess Artemis. But this was no ordinary hunt. He could not harm the animal. He had to catch it alive, and the hind was faster than the wind. It could outrun arrows, evade traps, and vanish into the mist. To lay hands on such a creature would take more than strength. It would require patience beyond measure. Heracles searched for the hind across the Peloponnesian mountains, through icy rivers and dark woods. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months. Still, he pursued. He glimpsed it once, barely a flicker of golden horns disappearing into the forest. He chased it through moonlit valleys and over high ridges, careful never to exhaust it or strike. It was a sacred creature, and he feared the wrath of Artemis more than any monster. So he followed, quietly, respectfully, learning its patterns, waiting for the right moment, step by step. After nearly a year, his opportunity came. At dawn, the hind stopped to drink from a mountain stream. Heracles crept closer, holding his breath. He loosed a net not to harm, but to gently entangle its legs. With hand steady and voice soft, he calmed the creature. The deer did not scream or thrash. Somehow, it understood. He lifted it gently, his great arms cradling it like a flame. No blood had been shed. The labor was nearly complete, but the gods were watching, and their patience would soon be tested. As Heracles began his journey back, the air shifted. A great light descended before him, Artemis herself, radiant and furious. Her silver bow drawn, her eyes burned with divine rage. "You dare touch my sacred hind?" she demanded. Heracles knelt, not in fear, but in respect. He explained the truth. He had not killed, not wounded, not enslaved. He had done what was asked no more. Artemis, moved by his humility and restraint, allowed him to finish his task. But she warned, not all divine patience would be so forgiving. When Heracles presented the living hind to Eurystheus, the king demanded he hand it over at once. But Heracles had promised to return it to Artemis. So he offered a sly solution. He let the deer go just as the king reached to seize it. The hind bolted, vanishing into the forest before anyone could react. Eurystheus fumed, but the labor was considered complete. Heracles had succeeded with cleverness, not brute force. The next labor, however, would drag him from sacred glades into a world of violence and chaos. The Erymanthian boar. The fourth labor took Heracles to the snow-covered peaks of Mount Erymanthos, where a monstrous boar terrorized villages and shepherds. This beast was no ordinary pidget, was a mountain demon in flesh. As large as a bull, with tusks sharper than daggers, it uprooted trees, gored horses, and trampled entire herds. Locals whispered that it had been spawned by the gods themselves. Heracles was to capture it alive, not kill it, a task as dangerous as it was humiliating. He set off toward the blizzard-whipped ridges, where only madmen or monsters roamed. On his journey, Heracles stopped at the cave of Pholus, a wise and gentle centaur who welcomed him with warmth. They shared stories by firelight, and Heracles asked for wine. Pholus hesitated. The sacred wine was meant for all centaurs, but Heracles insisted. When the bottle was opened, the aroma drifted far and wide. Other centaurs, wild and furious, came galloping in, thinking their kin was under attack. What began as a peaceful stop turned into bloodshed. Heracles fought for his life, arrows flying, hooves pounding. Chaos shattered the mountainside. Tragically, in the aftermath, Pholus, Heracles' friend, died by accident. He picked up one of the poisoned arrows dipped in Hydra's blood, curious about their power. The tip pricked his skin. Within moments, the venom reached his heart, and he collapsed. Heracles mourned. Though immortal in strength, he carried mortal grief. He buried Pholus with honor among the pines. The snow fell silently. There was no time to weep. The Erymanthian boar still roamed free, and the labor had yet to be completed. Duty, for now, would bury sorrow. Following the boar's trail, Heracles climbed into the storm-choked highlands. The cold bit his skin. Snow blinded his path. He found the beast tearing through a frozen thicket, tusks steaming in the icy air. With a mighty roar, Heracles charged, dodging a deadly lunge. He gave chase through ravines and over cliffs, never slowing. At last, he drove the boar into a deep drift of snow, where its massive body struggled to move. Seizing the moment, he leapt, wrapped his arms around its neck, and bound it with unbreakable chains. Heracles dragged the beast down the mountains, its body still thrashing, its snout foaming. When he arrived at Eurystheus' court, the king saw the furious boar bellowing and snarling, eyes full of murder. Terrified, Eurystheus once again leapt into his bronze jar, begging Heracles to take it away. The labor was completed, but the king's fear only grew stronger. Each task seemed to make Heracles mightier and the gods more uneasy. The next trial would be filthier, stranger, and no less deadly. The Aegean stables awaited, and they hadn't been cleaned in centuries. The fifth labor sounded less like a heroic feat and more like a punishment. Heracles was commanded to clean the stables of King Augeas of Elis. At first, he laughed until he learned the details. The stables housed over 1,000 immortal cattle, sacred to the gods. They hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. The filth was knee-deep, the stench unbearable. Rivers of dung flowed beneath cobweb-covered beams. No man had dared even approach them. The task was designed not just to test his strength, but to humiliate him completely. Upon arrival, Heracles inspected the stables in silence. He didn't grab a shovel. Instead, he walked the perimeter, studying the terrain, the earth, the rivers nearby. Then he approached King Augeas and struck a bargain. "If I can clean your stables in a single day," he said, "will you reward me with 1/10 of your cattle?" Augeas, scoffing at the impossibility, agreed. He didn't believe it could be done. He thought Heracles would fail, covered in dung, defeated not by monsters but by manure. He was wrong. Heracles didn't touch a single pile of filth. Instead, with his bare hands and sheer might, he smashed 2 massive openings through the stable walls. Then, he diverted the course of 2 mighty rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, through the stable corridors. The roaring waters surged in, washing away decades of filth in a single afternoon. What had been foul became clean. The sun glistened off stone and straw. The labor was finished without lifting a spade. Heracles had conquered with intelligence, not muscle end that made Hera furious. But the story didn't end there. Augeas, realizing Heracles had succeeded, refused to pay him the promised reward. Worse, when Eurystheus heard that Heracles had been paid for the labor despite the deal being broken, ruled it invalid. "It doesn't count," the king declared. Heracles gritted his teeth but said nothing. He didn't argue. The gods were watching. Whether men counted the deed or not, the earth had been cleansed by his will. And now, the next task loomed on, of grace, wings, and steel: the Stymphalian birds. In the dark wetlands of Arcadia, monstrous birds filled the skies, the Stymphalian birds. They weren't ordinary creatures. These birds were sacred to Ares, god of war. They had beaks of bronze, feathers like razors, and claws that could slice flesh like silk. Their cries shattered windows. Their dung poisoned the soil. Whole towns lay abandoned beneath their plague. Heracles' task was to drive them away or destroy them entirely. But the swamps were deep, the air choked with fog, and the flocks watched from above, waiting to strike. Heracles stood at the edge of the marshlands near Lake Stymphalus. The sky above was dark, not from clouds, but from the wings of thousands of monstrous birds. These were no ordinary fowl. Forged by Ares himself, their feathers were blades, their beaks could pierce armor, and their droppings turned crops to ash. The local villagers had long abandoned their homes. Heracles' task: rid the swamp of the flock. But how do you strike the sky? The reeds were too thick to advance. The mud swallowed his steps. They would strike from above. For hours, Heracles tried to approach, but each time the birds rose and attacked, raining down metal feathers like arrows. His shield was torn, his arms bloodied. He needed a new plan. Then, the goddess Athena appeared not with pity, but with strategy. She gave him a gift: a pair of bronze, crotolaclishing noise, makers forged by Hephaestus. When struck together, they created a divine cacophony, a sound that pierced heaven and earth. With this weapon of chaos, Heracles marched back to the marsh, no longer quiet, but thundering. Standing on a high ridge above the lake, Heracles raised the crotala and smashed them together. The clang echoed through the mountains. The sound was unbearable. The birds screamed, panicked, and broke formation. The sky became a storm of wings and metal, flocks fleeing in all directions. Heracles fired arrow after poisoned arrow into the madness. Dozens of birds fell, pierced by hydra-tipped shafts. Others flew far beyond the horizon, never to return. The swamp, for the first time in decades, fell silent. No screeching, no feathers, just wind. When he returned, Eurystheus was disappointed. He had hoped that the birds would tear Hercules to pieces. "Did you kill them all?" the king asked with a grin. "No," Hercules replied. "I drove them away, as ordered." The task was accepted, but resentment was simmering. The god, watching from Olympus, was becoming increasingly agitated. Hercules had faced death again and again, and refused to break. But now his next task would take him far from Greece, into a wild land where no Greek flag flew. He would hunt a sacred bull in the land of the Cretans. The seventh labor was simple in words, but deadly in practice. Capture the Cretan bull. This majestic creature had once been a gift from Poseidon to King Minos, but the king refused to sacrifice it. As punishment, Poseidon drove the bull mad. It tore through fields, crushed walls, and breathed steam like a furnace. Some whispered it was the father of the Minotaur. Heracles sailed to Crete, where the bull now roamed free. The king offered no help. The islanders prayed for relief. Heracles gripped his club and began the hunt. The Cretan bull was no mindless beast. It was a symbol of divine punishment. Once calm and magnificent, it had been twisted by Poseidon's fury. Its body shimmered like silver beneath the sun, its horns long and curved like crescent moons. Steam hissed from its nostrils as it thundered across the plains of Crete. Heracles tracked the creature for 3 days, studying its patterns. The locals watched from behind closed doors. Even soldiers had tried and failed. But Heracles, patient and unshaken, waited for the moment when beast and man would collide. At dawn on the 4th day, he struck. He cornered the bull in a narrow pass near the cliffs. The beast snorted, scraped the ground with its hooves, and charged. Heracles didn't dodge, he met it head-on. Grabbing the bull by its horns, he braced his legs and twisted. The ground cracked beneath him. The beast bucked and bellowed, but Heracles held firm. Muscles bulged, sweat poured, but inch by inch, he forced the creature to its knees. He bound its legs with heavy rope, using no weapons, only his strength. Heracles did not kill the bull. He respected its power. Instead, he led it alive across the sea, returning to Tiryns. Crowds watched in disbelief as he marched the beast through the city streets. Eurystheus took one look at the creature and panicked again, hiding in his bronze jar. He accepted the labor, but ordered the bull released immediately. Freed, the creature rampaged north, eventually reaching Marathon, where it would become part of another myth. As for Heracles, barely rested before the next command came: capture the man-eating mares of Diomedes. The 8th labor would take Heracles into the war-torn land of Thrace. There, King Diomedes ruled with cruelty, feeding his 4 savage mares the flesh of his enemies and, sometimes, his guests. These weren't ordinary horses. They were fire-eyed, iron-breathed beasts that chewed bones and trampled soldiers. No stable could hold them. Heracles had to capture them alive and return them to Tiryns. But to do that, he would have to face Diomedes himself, a son of Ares, who delighted in death and raised beasts in his own bloody image. Heracles set sail with a small crew, landing on Thracian shores cloaked in mist. The land was silent, unnatural, no birds, no villages, only the sound of hooves in the distance. The mares grazed near the palace, blood on their muzzles. Heracles and his men approached carefully, but Diomedes arrived with an army. Battle broke out under stormy skies. Heracles fought like a whirlwind, cutting through warriors with his club and fists. He captured Diomedes alive, throwing him over his shoulder like a sack of wheat. The key to taming the horses was terror. Diomedes, king of Thrace, begged for mercy, but Heracles had none to give. With grim resolve, he dragged the tyrant toward the iron-walled enclosure, where the monstrous mares waited. Their eyes glowed with bloodlust, snorting and pawing at the ground. Heracles lifted Diomedes like a sack of grain and hurled him inside. The horses charged instantly. Flesh was torn, bones shattered, and the king's screams vanished beneath the sound of crunching jaws. But then the mares grew silent, docile. Heracles approached, fastened their bridles, and led them away, tamed by the taste of their master's evil. Heracles returned to Tiryns, leading the blood-fed mares behind him like broken shadows. Eurystheus recoiled at the sight, then quickly ordered the creatures sent to Hera as a tribute. Some say she loosed them into the wild. Others believe she offered them to Zeus in sacrifice. Either way, their reign of terror ended. Yet no labor ever brought peace for long. The next command came swiftly. Heracles was sent eastward to a kingdom of warrior women, where the task was not to slay a beast but to take the enchanted war belt of Queen Hippolyta. Gathering a band of loyal fighters, Heracles sailed beyond familiar shores. The sea turned, cruel storms rose, pirates attacked, but he pressed on. At last, they reached the dark forests and coastal cities of the Amazons. Their queen, Hippolyta, rode forth to meet him, her armor glinting in the sun. Tall, composed, and proud, she listened to his request, and in a rare moment of warrior respect, she agreed. No blood, no test, only honor. She offered him the belt as a gift, a gesture between equals. But Hera, jealous and cunning, was not finished. Hera, ever the saboteur, donned Amazon garb and moved among the warriors by night. Her whispers were poison. Heracles is here to kidnap your queen. He means to enslave us all. The seed of doubt bloomed into rage. At sunrise, the Amazons stormed the camp. Chaos exploded, blades clashed, horses screamed, and the river ran red. Caught in the storm, Heracles defended himself, but he could not stop the tragedy. Queen Hippolyta, rushing to restore peace, was struck down amid the confusion. Her blood soaked the earth, and Hera, watching from afar, smiled with satisfaction. Cradling the lifeless body of the queen, Heracles clenched his fists in silence. The belt lay beside her, now a hollow prize soaked in death. He took it, not in triumph, but in mourning, and led his men away under rain-blackened skies. Behind him, the cries of grieving Amazons echoed like war drums. When he returned to Eurystheus, the labor was deemed complete, but Heracles felt no victory, only regret. The belt had brought him no glory. The next task would take him even farther, across oceans, to a three-bodied giant and his herd of blazing red cattle. For his 10th labor, Heracles was sent beyond the ends of the earth to Erythea, the red island in the far west, where the sun set each night. His task, to steal the prized cattle of Geryon, a monstrous giant with 3 bodies, 3 heads, and 1 soul. The herd, glowing red like fire, was guarded by a 2-headed hound named Orthrus and herded by a fierce warrior. This was no simple theft. It was an invasion into a world of death, guarded by beasts and a king whose gaze was as deadly as his weapons. To reach Erythea, Heracles had to cross scorching lands and endless deserts. As he trudged westward under the burning sun, his rage grew. In a moment of fury, he drew his bow and shot an arrow into the sky, striking the sun itself. Apollo, impressed by his audacity, didn't strike him down. Instead, he offered Heracles his golden chariot, which carried the sun across the sky each day. Riding in divine fire, Heracles soared across the sea, past the pillars of Heracles, and landed on the red shores of the edge of the world. On the island, Heracles moved silently. The land was barren, bathed in eternal twilight. The red cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of the coming storm. First, he faced Orthrus, the 2-headed hound. The beast lunged, snarling from both mouths, but Heracles smashed it with a single blow from his club. Then came Eurytion, the herdsman, fierce and loyal. He too fell quickly, but Heracles knew the final test remained: Geryon himself. The giant approached from the horizon, a living mountain of muscle and armor, his 3 torsos shimmering like bronze towers in the dying sun. The battle was like none Heracles had ever faced. Geryon struck from 3 directions at once's words, spears, and rage flying like a storm. Heracles dodged and countered, every blow thundering like an earthquake. Finally, he pulled a poisoned arrow from his quiver dipped in Hydra's blood and aimed true. It struck the giant's side, piercing all 3 hearts as one. Geryon let out a roar that shook the skies, then collapsed. Heracles, bruised but alive, gathered the cattle and began the long journey back through pirates, floods, and burning plains. The journey home with the cattle was as difficult as the battle itself. At every turn, Hera sent obstacles: raging rivers, bandits, and scorching winds. In one region, Heracles founded an altar to Zeus to give thanks for his survival. Some say it still stands today in southern Iberia. When he finally returned to Tiryns, the red cattle glowing behind him, Eurystheus had no choice but to accept the labor. But the king was restless. Heracles had crossed the edge of the world and returned. The final 2 labors had to be worse, far worse. The penultimate labor would take Heracles farther than ever before. Eurystheus ordered him to steal golden apples from the garden of the Hesperidesa sacred grove, where immortality bloomed on the branches of an enchanted tree. The tree had been a wedding gift from Gaia to Hera, and was guarded by 3 nymphs, the Hesperidescent, a monstrous, immortal serpent named Ladon, coiled endlessly around its trunk. The location of the garden was a mystery, hidden at the edge of the world where day meets night. Heracles had no map, only rumors and relentless determination. Heracles wandered for weeks, crossing scorching deserts, icy rivers, and foreign kingdoms in search of the garden. Along the way, he encountered strange beings, bearded river gods, whispering trees, and half-forgotten spirits. In the land of Egypt, he was captured by a cruel king who sought to sacrifice him to the Nile gods, but Heracles broke free, slaughtered the priests, and fled. Eventually, he found the old man of the sea, Nereus, a shape-shifting prophet. Heracles seized him and held tight through every transformation: lion, serpent, fire. At last, Nereus relented and told him where to go. Guided by Nereus's words, Heracles continued west until he reached the edge of the earth, where the sky meets the land, and Atlas holds up the heavens. There, in a golden twilight, stood the garden of the Hesperides. Ladon, the dragon serpent, writhed silently around the tree, his many eyes ever watchful. Heracles knew force alone wouldn't work here. So, he found at last the ancient Titan who bore the sky upon his shoulders and made him an offer. "If you fetch the apples for me, I'll hold the heavens in your place." Atlas smiled. It was an offer he couldn't resist. Atlas handed the weight of the sky to Heracles, who braced himself beneath the crushing dome of the firmament. Muscles strained, bones screamed, but Heracles held it. Atlas strode into the garden, charmed the Hesperides, and plucked 3 golden apples from the tree while Ladon hissed quietly, unable to act. When Atlas returned, he looked up at Heracles and said, "I'll take the apples to Eurystheus myself. You can keep holding the sky." But Heracles was ready. He pretended to agree and asked only that Atlas briefly take the sky back so he could adjust his cloak. Atlas, smug and unsuspecting, lifted the sky once more. And in that moment, Heracles took the apples, thanked the Titan, and left him standing beneath the eternal weight. With the golden fruit secured, he returned across the world, facing sirens, illusions, and spirits along the way. When he delivered the apples to Eurystheus, the king admired them but could not keep them. The apples belonged to the gods. By Zeus's decree, Heracles returned them to Athena, who placed them back in the garden. The labor was complete. Only one remained, the most terrifying of all. The 12th and final labor would take Heracles where no living man dared tread into the realm of the dead. Eurystheus demanded he descend to the underworld and return with Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound who guarded the gates of Hades. This was not a task of brute force, but of spirit. Heracles would face shades, punishments, forgotten gods, and death itself. Armed only with his lion's cloak and unbreakable club, he set out to the land of black rivers and lost souls. For once, even the hero felt fear. Heracles traveled to the edge of the world, where the entrance to the underworld yawned beneath a cave known as Taenarum. There, he offered sacrifices to Persephone and Hades, asking for safe passage. The earth trembled. The cavern split, revealing a path of shadow and silence. As Heracles walked deeper, the air thickened. Souls brushed against his skin like cold smoke. He passed fields of asphodel, where the dead wandered in forgetful murmurs. Even mighty Heracles grew pale in that place, but he pressed on toward the throne of Hades himself. In the heart of the underworld, Heracles came before the god and queen of the dead. Hades, stern and quiet, asked him plainly, "Will you take the beast by force?" Heracles bowed. "Only if I must." Impressed by his restraint, Hades agreed on one condition: Cerberus must be taken without sword or spear. Heracles accepted. He left the throne room and found the great hound near the gates of Tartarus. Cerberus rose, 3 heads growling, eyes glowing green. Its serpent tail hissed. The ground cracked. Heracles gripped his club tighter and stepped forward. The battle was brutal and silent. Cerberus lunged, all 3 mouths snapping like thunder. Heracles dodged, rolled, and struck not to kill, but to control. He seized the beast by its writhing necks, wrestling it to the ground. One head bit his arm, another tore at his leg, but he held firm. Veins bulged, blood flowed, yet he did not let go. Slowly, Cerberus weakened, then still not defeated, but yielded. Heracles chained the creature with adamantine links and began the long, shuddering climb back to the world of the living, dragging death itself behind him. When Heracles emerged into sunlight, Cerberus snarling behind him, the world stood still. Mortals screamed and fled. Birds fell silent. Eurystheus saw the beast and collapsed in terror, begging Heracles to return it at once. The hero obliged, guiding the hound back to the underworld unharmed. The 12th labor was complete. Heracles had conquered not just monsters, but mortality. Few would ever match such a journey. But though his tasks were done, his legend had just begun. He would walk the line between man and God until the heavens themselves welcomed him home. Though the 12 labors were complete, Heracles' journey was far from over. He wandered across Greece and beyond, facing new monsters, tyrants, and injustices. He fought river gods, freed kingdoms, and even sailed with the Argonauts. But his greatest trials came not from beasts but from men. His strength inspired awe, but also fear and envy. He married again to Deianira, a woman of great beauty and kindness. But fate, as always, waited in ambush. Heracles could conquer armies, but he could not escape the curses left in Hera's wake. One day, Heracles rescued Deianira from a centaur named Nessus, who tried to abduct her. Heracles shot him with a poisoned arrow, and as the centaur lay dying, he whispered a lie. He told Deianira that his blood could keep Heracles faithful forever if used as a love charm. Years later, fearing her husband's heart was drifting, Deianira soaked a robe in the centaur's blood and gave it to Heracles. But the blood was tainted with Hydra's poison. When he wore the garment, his flesh burned. His screams echoed through the mountains like thunder. The pain was unbearable. The robe clung to his skin like fire, refusing to be torn away. Heracles tore through forests, trying to end the agony. Finally, he built his own funeral pyre atop Mount Oeta. As flames licked the sky, he lay atop the woodpile and ordered it to be lit. But no one dared do it until a friend named Philoctetes stepped forward. He lit the flame. Fire consumed the body of the greatest hero Greece had ever known. The sky darkened, thunder rolled, and then silence. But Heracles did not die as men die. His mortal body was gone, but his immortal spirit rose. Thunder cracked open the heavens, and Zeus himself welcomed his son to Olympus. There, he was granted godhood, no longer bound to mortal pain or Hera's wrath. The goddess, at last, made peace with him. He married Hebe, goddess of youth, and lived among the stars, his image carved into constellations. No longer a slave to fate, he became its master. Heracles, the mortal, was gone. Heracles, the god, had risen. His story was told in every corner of the world, from temples to battlefields, from poems to stars. Heracles became a symbol of endurance, of courage, of rising from pain stronger than before. He was not perfect. He was not always gentle, but he was never defeated. 12 labors did not break him, they revealed him. Not just a hero, not just a man, but a bridge between heaven and earth. And in that space, forever, stands Heracleslian cloaked, club in hand, eyes full of fire, the greatest of mortals, and more than mortal still. Long after Heracles ascended to Olympus, his legend took root in the hearts of mortals. His name was carved into temples, whispered in battle prayers, etched into marble. In every corner of the Greek world, children learned of the lion slayer, the hydra smasher, the man who bent the sky. His 12 labors became a blueprint for struggle, each task symbolic of hardship, temptation, endurance. No matter the enemy beast, man, or self, Heracles overcame. And in doing so, he offered mortals something even more powerful than myth, a model for survival through pain. In Rome, he was called Hercules, and emperors claimed his bloodline. Soldiers wore his image into war. Gladiators prayed to him before battle. His name crossed mountains and seas, appearing in Gaul, Britain, and beyond. Artists painted him locked in eternal struggle. Philosophers debated whether he was a man or a divine idea. Poets said he carved his own soul with each labor. To slaves, he was freedom through resistance. To rulers, he was order through power. Heracles became everyone's hero, because he had suffered like everyone else and risen anyway. The church age came, and yet his name remained. In medieval texts, he was reimagined as a Christ-like wanderer, battling demons of flesh and spirit. Renaissance thinkers studied his labors as allegories for virtue. Painters like Rubens and Michelangelo depicted him in colossal possessed muscles, bound yet eternal. In every age, every culture, Heracles was reborn, not because he never failed, but because he failed, endured, and fought again. His image morphed from god to hero to metaphor, but his essence survived. The strength to rise when all the world tries to break you. To this day, Heracles lives in story and stone. He appears in films, novels, operas, and comics. His name stands beside ideals, perseverance, justice, power. Psychology uses his myth to define inner struggle. The Herculean task still defines impossible labor. Athletes invoke him. Thinkers admire him. Children wear his name in schoolbooks and video games. Why? Because he embodies something eternal. Not just might, but choice. Heracles never stopped because he knew there was no glory in surrender. His muscles were powerful, but his will was unstoppable. And that, more than anything, is his true legacy. In the end, Heracles was not defined by being Zeus's son, nor by slaying monsters. He was defined by what he endured and what he chose in response. He could have given in to grief, madness, or pride. But each time he rose, and in rising, he carried all of us with him through time, myth, and meaning. We may never wrestle lions or hold up the sky, but we all face our own labors. And in those moments, we remember him, Heracles, the mortal who became legend, the legend who became God. What makes a hero? Is it strength, fame, divine blood? Or is it something quieter, something harder? The truth is, Heracles bled. He failed. He wept. He killed those he loved. And still he carried on. Through darkness and pain, through betrayal and madness, he kept going. That is why his name lived. Not because he was perfect, but because he refused to let brokenness define him. In that, Heracles isn't a distant myth. He is something far closer, a reflection of our struggle. Proof that rising after the fall is what shapes legends. The labors of Heracles were more than tasks. They were metaphors for life's brutal questions. How do you fight what cannot be killed? How do you clean what's beyond saving? How do you capture what is sacred? Or descend into death and return whole? Heracles answered not with philosophy but with action, with hands, with scars. Each labor was a question answered not in words but in will. His strength was not just in muscle but in repetition. He got up, again, and again, and again, until the impossible bent beneath his feet. We all face our own monsters: depression, grief, injustice, self-doubt. We all carry weights no one sees. Sometimes, we descend into our own underworlds and don't know the way back. But the myth of Heracles reminds us, pain is not the end. The 12 labors were not meant to destroy him. They revealed him. Every burden lifted, every demon wrestled, forged him into something more. Not just someone who could survive, but someone who could show others how. His myth is a map, and in our darkest hours, it lights the way. Perhaps that's why his story never faded. Not because of the monsters, but because of the man behind them. Because Heracles speaks to something we all crave. The belief that even when we fall, we are not finished. That endurance matters. That scars can become symbols. That even when the gods themselves test us, we still have a choice. To rise, to fight, to forgive ourselves, to keep walking through the fire. Heracles did not defeat death. He met it, wrestled with it, and earned a place beyond it. That is power. So when the road ahead seems endless, when the task feels too great, remember this: the man who held the sky was once a broken soul seeking redemption. He did not start perfect. He started in pain. And from that pain, he carved meaning, glory, and godhood. You don't need to slay a lion or capture a monster. Sometimes, your labor is simply getting through the day, and that is enough. That is strength. That is Heracles, not as a statue, but as a symbol of us, of what we can become. Heracles was not chosen for greatness. He was cursed into it. His story began in wrath, madness, and blood. But that's the secret: greatness isn't always born from peace. It's forged in chaos. He became a hero not because he was invincible, but because he was wounded and kept fighting. Because he was feared and still chose mercy. Because he was hated and still protected the world. Heracles never asked for glory. He asked for forgiveness. And in searching for it, he found something greater: purpose. And through purpose, transcendence. The gods gave Heracles trials. The world gave him cruelty. And yet, what he gave back was legend. His club became a symbol of justice. His lion cloak, a reminder of fear conquered. His hands, once stained with blood, lifted kingdoms. He could have become a tyrant. Instead, he became a guide. Each labor became a step on a path not upward to Olympus, but inward toward redemption. And in that walk, he left behind something more than monuments or myths. He left behind a challenge, not to be strong, but to be brave. In every generation, the world remakes Heracles, not with temples, but with choices. When a person rises from grief, when someone stands alone against cruelty, when someone lifts others despite their own wounds, there, Heracles breathes again. We don't need divine blood to follow him, we only need will. Each of us carries our own labors, our own dragons, our own descent and return. Heracles teaches us that being broken doesn't mean being finished. That strength isn't how hard you hit, it's how deeply you heal. So remember him not just as a hero of old, but as a story still unfolding. Not in the stars, but in your spine. Not in marble, but in muscle and memory. Heracles lives in every moment you choose to stand up when you could collapse. Every time you say, "This hurts, but I will keep going." His roar is in the silence between failure and courage. His fire burns in those who fight not because they want to, but because they must. He is not gone. He never was. And so, we end where all myths begin, with a choice. A man, a burden, a journey. Heracles did not conquer death. He met it with open arms and rose beyond it. His labors are done. But ours continue. Let us carry the fire he lit. Let us wear our scars like armor. Let us become legends, not through perfection, but through perseverance. The labors of Heracles were not just his. They belong to us now. And somewhere on the edge of heaven and earth he watches, smiling, waiting, ready to lift the sky again.